Okay, next target. Hey, there's our buddy. I wouldn't stand back there. Okay, finally getting around to doing a review and comparison of the Arken EPL-4 versus the UTG AccuShot. This is going to be more of a comparison than a review, considering I'm relatively new to all this, so I just wanted to kind of share my experiences with these two. Both of these optics are entry-level, low-doe, budget-friendly type of optics. This UTG was the very first scope I've purchased, and the Arken is the second scope I've ever purchased. The UTG is a 4-16 by 44 objective with a 30 millimeter ocular lens and a 30 millimeter body. The Arken is the EPL-4 6-24 by 50 millimeter objective lens, 38 millimeter ocular, and 30 millimeter tube as well. And I'll put all of these specs on the screen. The UTG I purchased in December of 22. Bought it off of Amazon for between $200 and $220. The Arken, I found it new on eBay. The eBay seller had it for a 15% discount. So I believe the list price was $439 and he had it 15% discount, which brought it down to $379. I put it in my watch list because I thought it might be a contender for my upgrade, and a couple days later that seller sent me an offer for an additional 5% discount, which brought it all the way down to $355. It seems like all of these kind of, I don't know, entry level to mid level 6-24s are all in the above $500 price range. So at $355, it seemed like a real bargain to me. And I've seen a lot of the reviews on YouTube. You know, most of them are pretty positive. There's, you know, some of them are negative, but for the most part, the majority of them are very positive. So the UTG comes with scope rings. Yeah, I believe these are medium. They have the thumb knobs on them, and these are fine for what I'm using them for. I'm using them for an air rifle, which has almost no recoil. Those knobs are easy to use. You can get plenty of torque on them to tighten them down. It came with a sunshade and flip-up scope caps. The bubble level was just a $6 or $7 Amazon item that I added. The scope, the rings, sunshade, and scope caps are what the UTG came with. The Arken came with just the scope, no rings, no bubble level. It came with a sunshade, and I believe this type of scope cap is called a bra. Let me just say this first. I wanted to upgrade from a 4-16 to a 6-24 so I could get the extra magnification. Most of what I'm doing is just target shooting at between 50 and 100 yards, and it's a lot easier to see the holes at 100 yards with a 24 power optic versus a 16 power optic. One of the reasons why the Arken made my list, it was significantly lighter than other kind of scopes in its price range and class. So most of the scopes that were in its price range and class were above 30 ounces. The UTG with the rings and the bubble level as it sits now weighs 1 pound 11 3/8 ounces. The Arken, as it sits now with the rings and the bubble level, weighs, and they're the same rings, they're the same UTG rings, weighs 1 pound 14 5/8 ounces. So the Arken only weighs 3 1/4 ounces more than the UTG. Given the size and the extra magnification, that's a pretty good option. One thing that I didn't realize when I was comparing these two optics was the size of the ocular lens. This has a 30 millimeter ocular lens and this has a 38 millimeter. And I didn't realize the advantage in having that larger ocular lens. The UTG is like using a 24-inch computer monitor. The Arken is like using a 32-inch computer monitor. The difference is significant. You can tell. You just get a bigger picture to look at. The reticles on both scopes are very similar. Both have illuminated reticles. This has red and green illumination. This just has red. Both reticles are very fine reticles. They're very crisp, so at maximum magnification, they're not too fat and bulky. The one thing that I realized about the Arken versus the UTG is that the UTG has a floating cross in the center of its reticle, and the Arken has a floating dot in the center of its reticle. And what I've come to realize is I much prefer the floating dot. To me, it just seems like it's easier to use. It seems like it's easier to hold on your target point. I think it's just nicer. Personal preference, I guess, but to me, it seems nicer with the floating dot instead of the floating crosshair. I tried to get some footage through each optic, but I don't have the right camera equipment to make that fair to each scope. So instead of me putting up some really bad footage and both of them looking bad, I'm just not going to put any footage up, and I'll just show you the pictures, and you'll have to live with my description of what each is like to use. Okay, turrets. Let me go through the UTG first. The turrets are fine to use. I wouldn't call them necessarily very nice. One of the things to note is the etching on the turrets. It is very small. Those of us with less than perfect eyes may strain to read them. The other thing I found with these turrets is there's a total of 6 set screws on each turret. So that first set screw that you see is you have to use a flat blade screwdriver to loosen that off. And you loosen it off 2 or 3 turns. And then beneath that is another set screw that is an Allen set screw. So you'll reach a small Allen wrench right through the middle of that flat blade set screw and loosen it off. And you'll do that with the other 2 sets of set screws on this turret and on the windage turret. So there's a total of 6 set screws on each turret, and you'll have to loosen all 6 of them off, and then the turret loosens up and you can set it back to 0. I understand why they did that. It's, to prevent anything from backing off and loosening up. It works great. But if you don't know that, and it took me a little bit to figure out why the turrets wouldn't loosen up, is because there are actually 2 set screws, one on top of another, that hold the turret down. Okay, the turrets on the UTG, they click. It's a very soft click, but you can feel some play in between each click, and the clicks are soft enough to where you might dial the wrong amount of clicks if you're not paying very close attention. So I wouldn't call them great. I would call them usable. Parallax on the UTG is what I would consider smooth. It's not so tight that it's difficult to use. Same thing for the zoom. I would call it very smooth, but not so tight that it's difficult to turn. The ocular focus here, also very smooth, just a shade gritty. I can hear that when I turn it. You probably can too. It's just a little bit gritty, nothing bad. So that's the UTG. The Arken, the turrets, if you watch any reviews on Arken, they talk about how clicky and how tactile and positive the turret knobs are, and they are not joking. Compared to the UTG, they are 2, 3, 4 times more positive. The etching is very large, and therefore us with older eyes, that's a very nice option for it to have. The windage is marked with right and left. You don't have to look on the side which way's right and which way's left, so that's kind of nice. Adjusting the turrets, just 3 set screws up here, just loosen all 3 of them off. You can pull the knob up, set it back to 0, tighten all 3 back down. This one does have a 0 stop, which the UTG does not. Windage turret is kind of unique. It has this kind of keeper knob, or you can slide this knob off to re-zero it. And so it's basically toolless. And I saw one guy who did a review on this, and he was a little bit worried that the keeper knob here might vibrate off and it'd come loose, and then you'd lose the knob somehow, and then maybe you lose the turret knob too. I think there's enough threads on this, and I think you would notice it working its way loose before it would ever fall out. So I don't think you're in a lot of jeopardy of losing that. He was talking about using like a blue medium strength Loctite or something to keep it in, but I don't really see a need for that. Once you feel kind of how it locks in, it's going to be relatively vibration resistant, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. The other thing is, and I think this is, I guess this is a hunting thing, is the Arken comes with this cap to where you can, once you get it zeroed, you can just put a cap over your windage. Because I guess when you're hunting, it's just you're going to use a holdover instead of adjusting left to right for your windage. The parallax adjustment is nice and smooth. It's not too difficult to turn. The one thing that I will say is a little bit difficult to turn is the zoom on this. I do find that it requires quite a bit of torque to twist it back and forth. It's nothing you can't live with. Maybe that'll get broken in and loosen up over time. But I do find that even with the larger diameter, which would make it, easier to turn, it's significantly harder to turn than the UTG. So I guess that's my one complaint. Ocular focus is nice and smooth. No complaints there. Okay, hopefully I kept everything in camera frame. Okay, so the biggest item of importance on both of these optics is the glass. Now, I heard somebody say that you should basically buy as much glass as you can afford. And I find that to be good advice, but I think the reality is a little bit different. As a beginner, what I can tell you is the glass in the UTG works just fine. Now, when you're looking through it, you will see that the edges of the image are fuzzy. They are not completely in focus, and you can see all around the edges of the image, it'll start to get fuzzy. But the reality of that is most of the image, maybe 80%, maybe as high as 90%, is very clear. And it's very clear at all the zoom levels, from 4 all the way up to 16. I have very little problems seeing a hole that's a 1/4 inch in diameter at 100 yards with the UTG. And that's because when you're looking at something through the optic, you're looking at the center of the image. You're never really looking at the edges of the image. You never really see that fuzziness out of focus along the edges. It doesn't really come into play as much as you think it would. And I think that's the most important for new shooters to realize. If you're a new shooter and you have a $200 budget and you're just trying to get some basic equipment, I think that UTG is a fine option. I've shot thousands of rounds now with this UTG and have had 0 issues with it. The reason I upgraded is mainly for the magnification. While you can see 25 caliber holes in paper at 100 yards, the 16 power, it's significantly easier to see 25 caliber holes at 100 yards with 24 power. So mainly that's why I upgraded it. Let's talk about the glass in the Arken. The first thing that you notice using the Arken is the edge clarity of the glass is clear edge to edge. I would say 95 to 98% of the image with the Arken is very clear. Arken basically has 2 levels of glass. One of their popular scopes is an SH4 Gen 2, and it has HD glass. The EP line of scopes, this is an EPL-4, and it has the higher quality Japanese EP. I think it's EP glass, but I may be wrong about that. But the EP line of scopes for them has the higher quality Japanese glass, is what I want to convey there. So basically, I got into shooting for some minor pest control around the house. So I bought a budget-friendly, entry-level PCP air rifle. It's an Air Venturi Avenger bullpup in 25 caliber. I basically needed an optic for that gun just to do minor pest control. I did the minor pest control, works great, but what I found is I really like to target shoot in the backyard. It's a lot of fun and I really enjoy it. Basically, I'm shooting enough now to where I can kind of justify, cost per use for a nicer optic. Now, given the kind of the upgrades with the Arken versus the UTG, better glass, nicer turrets, higher magnification, and given the amount that I shoot now, cost per use goes way down. At $355 plus $20 in scope rings, call it $375 versus $200 to $220. I think the Arken is very good value for money. Basically anything else that I could find that had similar quality was above the $500 range and probably closer to the $700 range. $355, $375. I thought this was excellent value for money. Okay, what else can I say? I'm very happy with the EPL-4. Sorry if I messed up any of the terminology or the descriptions. Like I said, I'm new to all this, but I did want to just give everybody my thoughts as a new shooter, because when I was looking and trying to figure out what air rifle to buy and what optic to go on it, because I thought that I would do some shooting in the yard, all the way up to 100 yards. I really couldn't find anything. Talked about entry-level equipment. A lot of the reviews are for higher dollar, mid-grade and upper grade equipment. The other thing is I couldn't definitively, maybe I wasn't looking in the right place, but I couldn't definitively find someone who would say, you really need this power of scope at 100 yards. And I can, from my experience, definitively say, if I were to do it all over again, I would just go with the 24 power versus the 16 power, because I can still do minor pesting with a 24 power because it goes all the way down to 6 and it will focus in down to 10 yards. Whereas this will focus down to 10 yards as well. So you can do up close work and out pretty far work, both of them. In terms of target shooting in 100 yards, go with a minimum 24 power scope. I think 16, you can do it, but you'll always kind of struggle at that 100-yard distance. You'll be squinting to see where your punches are on your paper if you're not using a reactive target, splatterburst target. If there's anything I got wrong, just put it in the comments, and I usually respond to all the comments since I'm a new YouTube channel as well. I hope you guys found this helpful. Just wanted to share my perspective with the Arken EPL-4 6-24 by 50. Okay, thanks, and see you next time.